Okay, welcome in everybody to the College Hoop News Podcast. As usual, I am your host, Tony Patelis, and we are back for another conference preview tonight. If you missed it, we had our first preview on Sunday. We talked about the ACC, so you can definitely go to our YouTube channel and check that out if you have any time this week. Tonight, we're going to talk some SEC hoops. So obviously, I had to bring my good friend back, Blake Lovell from SoutheastHoops.com. He also has the Southeast Hoops podcast and the Marching to Madness podcast. I definitely highly recommend both if you have any time to check those out. You can find Blake on Twitter at the Blake Lovell. Blake, how are you, sir?
Tony, doing well. Yeah, it's podcast season.
It
I got
is.
the SEC podcast. We've got Marching to Madness, the national one, and then we've got your podcast. So hey, we've got a lot going on. But that's what happens when it gets to the 1st of October.
Absolutely. I am ready to go. We're about a little under, I think we're about 35 days away from game action. So getting really excited here.
Yep.
Love to talk some SEC. As we know, the SEC continues to improve every year with basketball. You know, during the ACC podcast, Blake, the other night, we were talking about what's the best conference in college basketball going to be this year. And generally, you can go right to the ACC. The last few years, you can also put the Big 12 in that mix. But my guest, Michael Hunter, actually mentioned the SEC as maybe being in that top two. And I was right there with him. I can really see that. I think the depth of this league is just incredible. We just talked about it off air, thinking maybe even 9 NCAA bids. Could you see the SEC creeping into that conversation this year?
Yeah, well, it sounds a lot better when you guys say it, because when I say it, it sounds like I'm a homer and it sounds like I'm coming across as someone who's just pumping up the SEC. But no, I mean, Tony, you look back as far as a couple years ago, it seems like we were talking about this maybe 2 years ago. We just kept saying, just wait, because it's like a major sort of turning point is coming. And we kind of saw that last year, but I think this year it's going to be even better. And I think the difference is this year, you don't just have, teams that are going to get into the tournament. You don't just have 7 or 8 teams that are going to get in, but yet, the majority of them are gone by the first weekend. I think this year you've got 6, 7 teams even possibly that you look at and say, I would not be shocked if these teams are Sweet 16 worthy or beyond. I think that's just how talented it is, and that makes the SEC one of the better conferences in the country, just because, like you said, of that depth, and because you have these teams at the top, especially in that top half, that you feel like aren't just teams that can get to the tournament. You feel like they're all teams that can win multiple games in the tournament.
Yeah, I agree with you. And another thing that I don't think gets talked about enough about this league is the coaching tree. Just the amount of excellent coaches. I mean, from top to bottom, you have Bruce Pearl, Rick Barnes, John Calipari, Mike White's an up-and-comer, Ben Howland. I mean, it just goes on. Will Wade is now in this league. So I can't talk enough about how well the coaching tree is in this conference.
Yeah, it's great. And I've got the number somewhere when you look at the NCAA tournament appearances combined for all these coaches, the Final Fours. You add someone like Tom Crean who comes in now, who has a Final Four on his resume. I know it was a while ago, but getting to the Final Four is not easy, no matter when it is. You add Kermit Davis now, and we've talked about him in the past. All the success he had at Middle Tennessee. He was made to kind of join the SEC at one point. It seems like we may have been talking about him a couple of years ago when the LSU job opened. It just seemed like Kermit Davis was going to come to the SEC at some point, and now he's at Ole Miss, so with a great opportunity there. But yeah, it is. It's from top to bottom. It's just sort of the coaching tree has never been this good just in terms of the overall depth. You've had great coaches in the league, but I think 1 through 14, there's never been sort of a league like this in terms of all the talent, and it shows in recruiting. I think that you look at what the SEC has been doing recruiting-wise this year, I think you've got 8 teams, something like that, in the top 40 of their class in 2018. You already look ahead to 2019. I was saying this earlier. You've got Florida's obviously jumped up there and getting Scotty Lewis. Both Florida and Kentucky are in the top 5. I think you've got several SEC teams like in the top 15 or something. Maybe it's 5. It's just, it's not just Kentucky anymore. It's not Kentucky that's getting the players. It's not Kentucky that all the attention is on anymore. And yes, we're talking about a team, and we'll discuss some more in detail, but you're talking about everybody, and everybody's sort of being able to jump up and get these top tier players, whether it's Vanderbilt, LSU, whoever. It's everybody's getting a piece of the pie, and I think that's why you've got the strength the way it is from top to bottom.
Absolutely. All right. So as we do with our conference previews, we're going to get right into our team previews. We're going to break down each team, and then we'll have some picks and some at the end of this podcast. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, as we usually do. So first tonight, Blake, just buckle up right out of the gate. You know who we're going to talk about first.
Buckled up. I've been buckled up for a while now, Tony. I think you're the one who needs to follow the advice. At least that's what Twitter tells me. I see them all the time. They're telling you to buckle up. So
tell me every day. So Alabama is first on the docket tonight. So coming off a 20-16 season, they did win an NCAA, getting back to the NCAA tournament for the first time, I believe, since 2011. They won an NCAA tournament game. A lot of buzz around this conference. Team. Avery Johnson, since he's arrived, he's got the attention back on the basketball program. I think last year, as inconsistent kind of as the team was, I think the season as a whole was a good stepping stone, as I said, getting back to the tournament, actually winning a game. When you're looking at this year's group, you have plenty of pieces back from last year's team. Dante Hall is a really talented guy up front. John Petty, Herb Jones, Dazon Ingram. Also, Riley Norris is back from an injury. I believe he missed most of last season. He got a waiver. Alex Reese. I really like the depth of this team. They have a ton of length. I like the size up front. Can they get better defensively? I think they were 9th in the league last year. And they have to be more efficient on the offensive end. I think the addition of Texas transfer Tevin Mack will definitely help out in that department. He's a really high-volume scorer. I think a key was getting Kira Lewis, the big addition at point guard with Colin Sexton off to the NBA. What are your thoughts on this team this year?
Well, I think you said it, and it seems like consistency's been the main thing really in Avery Johnson's tenure there, and that's not knocking him. It's just they've had problems consistency-wise. I mean, we see Alabama do really, really good things, and then you see them do really, really bad things. It's like you don't always get the same team, and that's kind of been the theme they've had over the past couple of years. But you look at this year's team, I mean, like you said, look at everybody that's coming back. I think 9 of their top 11 scorers are back. Certainly, one of those 2 that aren't back, Colin Sexton, was a huge deal, and it's someone who everything kind of ran through. But getting Lewis was huge just because now you have a point guard you feel like can kind of facilitate everything, but not just that, but he kind of has that, and I'm not going to sit here and compare him to Colin Sexton because I don't necessarily think that's fair. But he does have, a similar type of style in that he's very quick. He's someone that can kind of, beat you in a lot of different ways. He's a multi-dimensional player, and he can make other players better. And that's what they're going to have to do this year because you look at that offense. I think there are definitely more concerns on the offensive end than defensive end for me because you just got to have consistency because teams are going to make them shoot jump shots. That's what I would do. Even though, they do have some good players. Tevin Mack, like you mentioned, is going to help them from a shooting perspective. Riley Norris comes back. He helps. But you still would probably rather take your chances on making them shoot rather than having someone like Lewis or Dazon Ingram driving the lane and beating you that way. So they've got to shoot the ball better. I think last year they were around that 290th, something like that in the country in three-point shooting. I think it's 32.6%. Free throw shooting, I know we could spend an hour on this, Tony, because that's your brand these days. But they just haven't been a good free throw shooting team either. And those are the kind of things that we know really matters when you get late into games in February and March. So I want to see them get better there. But from a roster perspective, they've got the majority of the pieces that you need to be really successful. And I would put them right now as an NCAA tournament team, and I'd feel pretty good about that. Can they be in that top 5 in the SEC above some of these other teams we're going to talk about? It's possible, but I think it's just a matter of finding that offensive consistency and being able to do that. If they can do that, then I think they'll be okay. But you don't want to see those stretches where they're going all this time without scoring. And I really am. I'm very intrigued to see how Tevin Mack factors into the mix. He's going to be a big player for them for right away. I mean, he's going to step right in and have to make an impact. But I'm very interested to see kind of how that chemistry comes together with all those guys, because I do think he's a very good piece mixing in with these other guys they have coming back.
Yeah, the two players I wanted to ask you about first is Herb Jones, who I think is a possible breakout guy in this conference this year. Really athletic wing, length, really good defender. The thing I'm a little bit concerned about is how much of a step up can he take on the offensive end of the floor this year. We know what he can do on defense. What do you think about his game, and do you think he's ready to maybe be a double-digit scorer for this team?
Yeah, I think that's what we have to kind of wait and see on because he's someone, just you talk about instinct. He just has a really good basketball instinct, because we see all the plays he made on the defensive end of the floor. And, you look at the things, even like charges. I know those aren't the sexiest things in the world, but, having all the charges that he did, he just always found himself in the right spot on the defensive end of the floor. But on offense, he really didn't have to do a whole lot. And I don't necessarily know that he's going to be relied upon to do that much again this year, because they do, they have several guys in front of them they're probably going to go to in those key situations that we talk about. But yeah, it is an important part of his game, because he's someone I think you look at when we talk to the comparisons. The funny thing, I remember talking to Avery Johnson last year, and it was the first time I heard it, but when he said it, it's like, comparing him to a young Scottie Pippen and kind of saying he had that sort of style of play. And you could see that, I think, at times with the way he played last year. It's just seeing how the offense develops. Is he going to be relied upon to be in a more prominent role on the offense end of the floor? If he is, that's something we'll have to kind of watch and see how he progresses there. But boy, that length, just his ability, again, that instinct, I think, is very important. He's going to be, one of the most valuable pieces, I think, on their roster this year. And he's going to kind of, be one of those guys they rely upon to do a lot of different things and really help them in those clutch situations, I think.
Absolutely. And the other player I wanted to ask you about, Blake, is John Petty. He came in with a lot of hype last year. He kind of had an up and down season, very streaky. He's going to probably be looked at again as a primary scorer on this team, next to Tevin Mack. He's kind of one-dimensional to me, though, too. I mean, outside of the three-point shooting, what else does he do to contribute? What do you think he's going to have to do to, improve his game this year?
Well, and you're stealing my notes, but I think that's something probably a lot of people have wrote down, because that's exactly what I have written down when I do all these notes I do on these different teams. It's the exact thing, and I'll read it word for word. It says has to add more dimensions to his game, and I think that's what it comes down to with John Petty. And look, he was a freshman last year, and always, people seem to be quick whenever you kind of criticize some of these guys. But when they're freshmen, we know, I mean, unless you're talking about just a surefire, freshman guy that's going to go to be an NBA lottery pick the next year, there's room to grow as a player. And I think for him, the way he shoots the ball, I mean, my goodness, there's a lot of players around the country that wish they could shoot the ball the way that he does. But that's what everybody else knows too. That's what people playing against Alabama know, is that you have to make him put the ball on the floor. And I think that's going to be interesting. I mean, he took 242 three-point attempts last year. That was something that really stood out for me, knowing that that's his game, and making 90, shooting as well as he did from outside. If he can kind of develop a game where, let's say, you're running in transition, you see John Petty on the wing, you pass it to him, a defender comes out and guards him immediately, can he put the ball on the floor and go in on a consistent basis and be able to score? If he can do that, he's going to wind up being, we talk about breakout players, he's going to wind up being one of the breakout players in the SEC, and could wind up being one of the better scorers. And I think that's something they've worked with him on this offseason, seeing it all come together. If that happens, look out, because he could have a monster sophomore year, I think, for Alabama.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it really is the offensive end of the floor. They got to get better on that end and get a little bit more efficient, and they could be right in the thick of it again. I know, Blake, that you haven't put your rankings together yet for this conference. You're still working on those, but I have them at 7. I think that's a pretty fair spot. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think, and as we go along, you'll see. I think there's some interchangeable parts in the middle. Alabama could kind of be in that. I would probably put them in that 6 to 8 range right now.
Right.
Just looking at them on paper. And that's the thing too. Before we go any further, I think this is very important for people who hear this, because being 6th to 8th in the SEC this year, if you're 6th in the SEC, I legitimately think you're probably still a top 25 or at least top 30 type of team. It's going to be that kind of year where you've got 5 or 6 SEC teams, I think, continually being in the top 25 pretty much all year long.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So let's move on here. We're going to talk about the Arkansas Razorbacks next. 23-12 last year. They did make the NCAA tournament. They got first round exit. Butler took them down. So really, Blake, outside of Daniel Gafford, the Razorbacks are going to be basically starting over. The Hogs lose Jalen Barford, Anton Beard, Daryl Macon, and a few other pieces. So Mike Anderson's going to be pretty much working with a new look team. They actually have more newcomers than Kentucky, I was reading today. And there's not many really intriguing new pieces, in my opinion. Daniel Gafford obviously looks prime for a big season. He's going to have to do a lot. He might have to actually carry this team on his back. I think they're going to take a big step back. I think you're right there with me. What do you think about Arkansas this year?
Well, you said it. I think you look at Kentucky year in and year out, and you're like, well, if Kentucky loses 8 of their top 10 scores, it's kind of understood. But Arkansas loses 8 of their top 10 scores, and it's like you're not necessarily filling them with, let's say a freshman group of 6. You're not filling them with 5 top 20 NBA draft prospects at this point. And so I think that's the big thing. And we just talked about it with John Petty, development. And I think Mike Anderson has a very good young class that he has coming in. I think the potential, there's loads of potential in that class, but they are players that are going to take some time to develop, as are most college basketball players, aside from the ones that go and get drafted. And so it's a learning process, and especially in a year like this where it's not just a learning process for a couple guys. It's everybody's having to kind of go through that process together. And I think that's going to make for a lot of frustration at times. And it's normal when you have a class like that. You have all the youth, because you lose all those seniors. And as much as we talked about how many seniors they had last year, you also had to look at it and say, well, they have this many seniors this year. What's it going to look like next year? And that's kind of where we are. With Gafford, I've mentioned this many times. He is an outstanding player. You can't teach the kind of things that he can do on the court. You can't teach that level of athleticism and just all the different things he can do. And again, he's going into his sophomore season, and he still has room to grow. It's scary to think of what he could be. On the flip side, I think you also have to look at Daryl Macon and Jalen Barford and say, well, they've made some pretty big contributions in terms of taking a lot of pressure off of him last year, to where he didn't have to do everything. And I think that's the biggest question mark I have with Arkansas, is not just the youth and are they going to be able to win on the road? Because if you want to be a top tier SEC team, if you want to make the NCAA tournament, you're going to have to win games on the road. As young as they are, I think it's going to be a really tall order, especially in a year like this in the SEC. But beyond that, there really isn't anyone on the roster that I look at least at this point, without seeing Arkansas play yet. We don't know how things are progressing. We don't know what the chemistry looks like, any of that. And there's no way for us to know. But if we just look at it with what we have now, you don't see really many players on that roster that are going to take that kind of pressure off of Gafford. And that opposing teams are going to go through every single game. He's going to be getting double teamed. He's going to be getting triple teamed. Right. And it's just a matter of, hey, everybody else has to be able to contribute. And I think Mike Anderson thinks they have some guys that can fill those roles. They're not necessarily going to be Macon and Barford, but they feel like there are guys who, if Gafford has to pass out, knock down shots, they have guys that can do that. But when you compare Arkansas's roster to everyone else in the SEC and you talk about depth and experience, you just don't see a lot of that right now.
Yeah, and last year, even with a very experienced ball club, they were a poor defensive team. They pretty much just outscored everybody. And they averaged 80 a game. They gave up 75 a game, which was good for 263rd in the country. So I can't see them being that explosive offensively this year. So
Well,
if
and
they're
here's something. How about this? And I wrote this in my notes for them. Gafford took 8 shots a game last year. Next up was, or at least the guys they have coming back, was Adrio Bailey, who took 3 shots per game. So those are your 2 guys, that your top guys who shot the ball last year. Only one player on this returning roster made a 3-pointer last year. So you've got all these new guys. So think about it. You lose all your 3-point production from that team from last year. And I think it was Holmes who was one of those guys. He played like a minute per game, I think. He made 2 threes. So you lose all that. And so that's why you just have so many unknowns. And it's so hard to predict a team like that, what they're going to do when you lose all of that offense and you don't have, a full roster coming back that you could look at and dissect and say, oh, okay, that's where their scoring is going to come from. Because quite frankly, we just don't know where it's going to come from.
right, they're on the wait and see list. We just have to wait and see if some of these freshmen, some of these newcomers can come in and make some contributions. And unfortunately, right now, you just kind of have to say it's going to be a transition year in Fayetteville.
Yep. And hey, look, Mike Anderson as a head coach. It seems like I brought this up past couple of years, but he's never had a losing record as a head coach. This year, not saying they're going to have a losing record, but I just think it is. It's going to be frustrating at times for Arkansas fans. But like I mentioned, I think you just got to keep in the back of your mind that a year like this, where there's so much roster turnover, if you're enjoying basketball, you just kind of have to watch people kind of grow. That chemistry is going to come together. There's going to be some guys that break out, that surprise us, and you just getting to watch Gafford is going to be a joy in and of itself. So,
for sure, I have them at 11. I thought that was a fair spot. So we'll see what happens. Up next, we're going to talk about Auburn. Obviously, Auburn is coming off fantastic season. I believe they tied with Tennessee for the SEC crown. They won 26 games. They made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament. Auburn basketball is relevant. It's actually relevant. It's been a long time. And this is exactly why they brought in Bruce Pearl. And we're already seeing some really good results. So they get the thing that I really keyed in on, and I'm sure everybody's keying in on, is they get back two all SEC guys in Austin Wiley and Daniel Purifoy, excuse me. They have a very strong core of returners. Jared Harper, Bryce Brown, Anthony McLemore is going to be back from that injury. I also like VCU transfer Samir Doty. I think he's going to contribute. I think losing Mustafa Haran obviously was a pretty big hit, but as I said, Wiley and Purifoy definitely softened that blow. Offensively, I think this team's going to be really good. Wiley kind of gives them an offensive weapon inside, which they didn't really have last year. Defense, still somewhat of an issue. I think they gave up 73 last year, which was good for like 10th in the conference. So a lot of good things with this team, a lot of pieces. What do you think about Auburn coming into this year, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's some people thinking that they may take a little bit of a step back, but here's my thing. Even if they take a minor step back, they're still going to be one of the better teams in the SEC. And quite frankly, they're probably still going to be one of the better teams in the country. You look at everybody that comes back, and really, I know what they lost. They did lose, Mustafa Heron, and Davion Mitchell was a good defender, and Deshaun Murray did some really good things for them. But, boy, you add Austin Wiley back, you add Purifoy back. It's just that there's so much to like for me on this roster, because you mentioned the guys like McLemore had a breakout year. Look at Chumo Kiki now with a year of experience under his belt. And Bruce Pearl, I know, just loves him, loves the way he plays. They've got depth, and depth is important. And look, if you have, I think I saw a video recently here as a practice video or something, when you've got like a guy like Austin Wiley looking the way he does now, and just such a physical presence, and the way that he's kind of transformed himself. And because we were talking about this before last season, before all the FBI stuff came into play, we looked at Austin Wiley last summer and said, my goodness, this guy has a chance to be an absolute monster this year and be one of the better big men in college basketball. Well, now he's going to come out, I think, with a chip on his shoulder. He's going to have that edge to him. And if he can step out and be able to knock down jump shots, which I think I've seen him do here recently in some of these videos, boy, I don't know how you stop Auburn, and I really don't. And I think they're going to be so fun to watch, just like they were last year. They're still going to play at a very high tempo. Bruce Pearl told me that this summer. I know they got the bigger guys back, but he still wants to play up and down. They're still going to have Jared Harper running in transition, one of the better, maybe one of the most underrated players in the country still, even as well as he did last year. I think Jared Harper just makes everything go for them. Bryce Brown knocking down shots the way he does. They shoot free throws very well, which I know you love. It's such a really good shooting team, and it's hard to prepare for really, really good shooting teams. And now that they add a monster big man who will not only be able to affect the game on offense, but on defense too, I love the way the roster looks, and I think you're talking about Auburn right there as a preseason top 10, top 15 team. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Yeah, and it just all came together last year. That they improved in so many different facets of the game. They got better on the glass. They got way better free throw shooting, as you mentioned. Offensively, they were really, really good. So I just love the depth of this team. I think Chuma Okeke really came in when Anthony McLemore went down with that injury last year, and he got some really beneficial minutes last year and played really well down the stretch. And I love his game. I think he's going to be an integral part of this year's team.
Yeah, you just look at his stat line. I mean, he's one of those guys that contributes in a lot of different areas, and just as Bruce Pearl would love, he's a guy who can shoot the three, and he can step out and knock down shots, even as a 6'8" forward. And that's what you want. You want a guy like that, and I think looking at him getting those valuable minutes, he shot pretty well from the floor. His percentages were nice. It's just they got a lot of versatile players, and I think that's something you got to have these days. They've got a lot of players on that roster that can help them in different ways, and they've got guys who have kind of carved out those roles. And they have really all the pieces, I think. And I think defensively, that's something probably people are going to look at, because we remember how bad they were a couple years ago, but made a huge jump last year. And something else too, Tony, I think you have to kind of consider with this team. I don't really have maybe as many doubts as other people may have in this regard, but their mindset, because you think about the mindset they had last year, playing with that chip on their shoulder all year long because they felt like they were wronged. They kind of felt like they were being disrespected, especially after the FBI stuff. But now you win the SEC, or you get the co-regular season title, you get to the NCAA tournament. Are you going to have that same kind of edge? And that's their all off season. They've been talking about their unfinished business. If they come out and play that way again, then they're a very dangerous team.
Yeah, and you got to think that Wiley and Purifoy are itching to get back on the court.
Oh yeah,
considering that they didn't play last year. The thing that's so scary about this team is they can have 4 or 5 guys on the court at once that can knock down 3-point shots.
Yeah, they could. And look, hey, if Wiley can make shots, if he's someone who starts to expand his game, which all these big men do, Purifoy was one of their better shooters, the year before, 16-17 season. Right. They got a lot of guys that can shoot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this might be one of the more tougher teams to guard, not only in the SEC, but in the country this year.
Yep. They'll be one of the better shooting teams, I think, in the country.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have them third in the conference. I think basically Tennessee, Kentucky, and Auburn are kind of fighting for that number 1 spot, I think.
Yep, I'd agree. I could interchange those 3 probably and wouldn't feel bad about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of that top tier from everybody, all the previews I've seen and everything. So another big year for Auburn, I think. I think we can both agree on that. So let's move on here. We're going to talk about Florida next. Florida 21-14 last year. They got to the second round of the NCAA tournament where they lost to Texas Tech. So I think it's safe to say, Blake, that Florida made the right decision hiring Mike White. What do you think?
I would say so. I think if you're looking up the recruiting rankings right now and seeing what they've done since he's gotten there, I'd say you're feeling pretty good. And there was a lot of people that had questions. Hey, I was one of them too, because you follow Billy Donovan. That's a tough thing to do, and that's not for everybody. But no, he's done a tremendous job.
Yeah. So let's look at this year's group. So. First of all, Mike White, he's won 69 games in his first 3 years. They've had 2 top 3 finishes. They got to the Elite 8 2 years ago. So as you said, recruiting is at a very high level right now. So they kind of really haven't skipped a beat. since he took over. So looking at this year's group, obviously you have to look at guys like Jalen Hudson. He's going to be an elite scorer. He's the kind of the top dog, I think, for this team this year. They're hoping, and I'm hoping, Kevon Allen can get back on track because he kind of just had a really off year last year. His efficiency was way down. His offensive numbers were way down. So hopefully he can get back on track. The kid I really like, and I wanted to ask you about, is Keith Stone. I think he's one of the breakout candidates in the SEC this year. I think he's going to see a much bigger role, see much more opportunities. I think the main thing for this team, though, is can they replace Chris Chiozza? And Andrew Nembhard is one of the better point guard prospects in this year's class, so that's good timing. But, Chiozza, I think, was such an integral part of this team. He was really the most valuable guy for the last few years. He made big plays, big shots. So that's the key for me. Can they replace Chris Chiozza? But I think this group is pretty intriguing. I think they're probably a top 5 or 6 team in the conference. What do you think about the Gators?
Yeah, I think so too. And to kind of start with the Chiozza thing, we remember last year, so season started off, you go out to the PK80, you see how well Florida's playing. And there were times, I think, where a lot of people were looking at Florida and saying, this could maybe be the best team in the country, at least at that point, with
Right.
the way they were playing. They had the game against Duke. You thought, my goodness, this could be one of the better teams, top 3, top 5 team in the country. But then after that, they had the fall off, and they were just so up and down. And I think the biggest thing that I looked at with them wasn't just the inconsistency overall, was they kind of looked like a team that was sometimes just kind of lost out there. And other than Chiozza, you didn't feel like you kind of had that maybe at times. You just felt like something was missing. And I wonder, losing him, does that kind of further that? Is this going to be one of those teams that maybe has some of those issues where who are you turning to? You feel like, you can turn to Jalen Hudson, you can turn to Kevon Allen. But I think they're going to be okay there. But like you mentioned as well, they did so well taking care of the ball last year, and bringing in Andrew Nembhard, he's a different player than Chris Chiozza. He's certainly a more dynamic scorer. What an excellent passer he is. He's going to step in right away and be able to really impact the game. He's going to be one of the better freshmen in the SEC. And I think that's kind of what it's going to come down to for them. They're going to have to defend at a very high level. They're going to have to do it on a night in and night out basis. Keith Stone, you mentioned him, just a very smooth offensive player. And he's kind of, and not to knock Kevarius Hayes, but Hayes is more of that defender type of guy, the way he blocks shots. He's a huge asset for them on that end of the floor. But then you have Stone, who can do things on both sides, but really his offense is a huge asset because now you got someone who can step out and make shots. He can score inside. Getting more physical, I think, is going to be important for him. And Florida's got a lot of options, I think, in terms of how they're going to play this year. I think they can go with several different rotations. If they want a 3-point shooting rotation, they've got that. If they want to go bigger, you bring in a guy like Chase Johnson, who's finally back from the concussion last year. I'd like that roster. And, maybe they're one of those teams that kind of will be put in that beyond, behind that maybe top 4 or 5 in the SEC. But you look at the roster, I think Mike Wright has so many interesting pieces to work with. That flexibility, I think, is going to make Florida one of the more intriguing teams going into the season, just because we could see them playing in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, the front court is what intrigues me with this team. They have a lot of options. Like you said, Chase Johnson, Jock Gack is back, Kevarius Hayes, Keith Stone. But somebody's got to step up. I feel like all those guys are kind of looked at as, role players per se. But I'd like to see one of those guys, or maybe even 2 of those guys, maybe, up their game this year so they can get some more production in the paint.
And Isaiah Stokes, who we haven't even seen step on the court yet, and they've been high on him ever since they signed him, and he's someone they thought was going to be huge right away if he can stay healthy. And that's going to be the big thing for Florida. And Mike White's already said it. When they do their media day, the practices they've already had, they've got to stay healthy. They've got to be able, if they can have this entire group on the floor. Every year you have an injury, somebody's going to get hurt. It just kind of happens sometimes. But if they can keep this team healthy, they've got a lot to work with, and they've got that depth I think you need. They just have to be able to defend at a very high level. But offensively, I don't think they're going to be in really good shape.
Yeah, and one guy we didn't even mention is DeAndre Ballard, who kind of like the first few games last year, he came out, guns blazing, and then he kind of fell off and was quiet the rest of the year. But he certainly got some capabilities, so maybe he can step up and give them a little bit more offense this year.
Yeah, he's one you throw in there. Noah Locke, the freshman, Keontae Johnson, that freshman class is really, really good. And you add them to this sophomore group. Like I mentioned, getting Chase Johnson back. I think Mike White's really high on him. His type of player, one of those hard-nosed type of guys that you really need on the floor. They've got the players. They've got the superstar type scorers. They've got the role players that can kind of do their thing. Florida's. I wouldn't sleep on Florida. I think that there's going to be some people look at it and feel like they're going to take a step back, maybe because of losing Chiozza, losing Igor Kulichov. The kind of leader on the court thing without Chiozza, but for everything he did for the program, that's something that we'll all have our eye on. But I think Nembhard's going to step in and be pretty entertaining right away.
Yeah, for sure. I have them at 6 heading into this season. So moving on here, we're going to talk about Georgia next. Coming off a pretty rough year, 18-15, 7-11 in the conference. They did not go to the postseason. And it's Tom Crean time, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Crean is in Athens. So Mark Fox gets the boot. They bring in Tom Crean. Do I think this is a pretty good college coach? Absolutely. I think he'll bring in some talent. Can he coach it up and get Georgia back towards the top half of the conference? We'll kind of have to wait and see. I think they're kind of, in a way, in the same boat as Arkansas. I think there's a lot of question marks with this team. They certainly have to replace Yante Maton, who was arguably the best player in the conference last year. And did they bring anything in recruiting wise that we can look at and say, wow, this player is going to come in and make a big impact? I don't think so. Correct?
Well, they've got some guys, but is there anyone that's going to step in and replace Yante Maton? No. And that's just the thing. And like you're saying, I think that's the biggest thing with this roster right now is do they have enough offensively? And you and I have talked about this before. I don't know. And I think that on one hand concerns me about Georgia, but on another hand, it's like I could see Georgia being a surprise team. And let me preface this by saying I don't think that means Georgia necessarily is going to be an NCAA tournament team because I think they have more question marks than some of these other teams do. But I could see Georgia surprising us, being able to win some of these games, beat some of these upper tier teams if everything comes together. But offensively, you do kind of look at it and say, where is all this going to come from? With Maton, scoring basically 20 points a game last year. He shot 14 times a game. Turtle Jackson, I think, was their second, leader in terms of field goal attempts, but he only took like 8 a game. And now it's like, well, somebody's got to take the shots, and guys are going to have to step up. Their field goal percentages were not good last year. They were pretty terrible from 3-point land. They were actually pretty decent, I think, from 2, but that had a lot to do with Maton and some of these other guys being able to get easy buckets. But I don't know. I think the offense, wondering where that's going to come from. However, you add a new coach. They're going to play a different way, probably maybe try to play a little bit faster because they didn't really play fast last year. If Tom Crean can put these guys in the right spots, they've got some pieces, and everybody's probably tired of hearing me say it. If you've listened to anything I've done this summer, I love the sophomore class with Rayshawn Hammonds, Nick Claxton, Tyshawn Hightower. I love that class. I think there's a ton of potential there. You just want to see these other guys step into these expanded roles like Turtle Jackson, Tyree Crump, guys like that. If they can, I think Georgia's got some versatility that they can work with and be able to win some games. If they can't, then it'll probably be a long year.
Do you think Derek Obidi could maybe step in and be a somewhat impactful player, or is he kind of more a 6-6 guy and he'll give you a solid defense? What do you think about Obidi?
Well, I think with him and Mark Fox, it's the one thing I kind of remember in talking to Mark Fox over the years is he's always just kind of said, he's never really been that guy who's had to be the go-to offensive guy in the paint. Like he's always been a battler. He's been that physical type that can get rebounds, he can score. But it's like, can he have that offensive presence on a night-in, night-out basis? Well, if he can, he's certainly going to get his opportunity, or at least so it seems now, without Maton in there. So if he becomes more of an offensive threat, that's huge, and I think that really helps them. Because otherwise, do you feel like you have a ton of guys in there that are going to be able to score on a night in, night out basis? I mentioned Claxton. I mean, he's athletic, he's versatile, but he's still got ways to go in terms of his offensive game. And I think that's the way it is with a lot of their front court guys. So they need him to. I mean, they need Derek Ogbede to be able to do that. If he can, then that would be a huge boost because he's a senior, and it would be nice to see him be able to do that. But otherwise, you're probably going to see a situation where a lot of stuff's going to have to go through their guards, going to have to go through their wing play. And most likely, I think, you're probably going to see a lot of stuff going through Rayshawn Hammonds. And looking at what he did last year, I think he's probably primed to handle it.
Now, Hammonds, I know, he was a pretty high-level recruit. Did he disappoint in your opinion last year a little bit, Blake, or was it just some freshman?
I think it was probably more the situation rather than maybe just disappointing. I mean, look, it's in any situation last year, if Georgia found themselves in a tough spot, there was no doubt where the ball was going. There was no doubt who was going to be taking over the game, and that was going to be Maton. And look, teams double-teamed Maton. He still scored. He's just one of those players. He's one of the better big men in the entire country. He was one of those guys. He could step out and shoot. He had expanded his game to that point. And so I think maybe with Hammonds, their guard play wasn't very good either, Tony. I mean, I think that's a problem too. It's like that they've got some guys you feel like should be playing at a higher level. Now, can Tom Crean put them in a spot to be able to get them to reach their potential? That's what we're going to find out, because that's going to that's going to decide everything. In a league that's filled with so many great guards, in a league that has some dominant big men, Georgia's got to somehow find a way to combat that. And I think that's going to be the biggest question we have for them.
Yeah, I have them in last place. I have them at 14. Like I said, I did my research, and I just don't see anything that pops off the page with this club. So hopefully Tom Crean can come in and maybe get some of these young guys going, but we'll see what happens. So we're going to talk about Kentucky next. Coming off a 26-11 season, they got to the Sweet 16, where they were knocked out, surprisingly, by Kansas State. And I think everybody's going to be surprised, but Kentucky's loaded with talent. Can you believe it?
Shocker. I was going to say, I have them in last place, Tony, so we'll just no.
So I was doing some research this week, and if I read this correctly, they have 7 former 5-star prospects on this roster and 3 4-star guys.
You might as well just say everyone's a 5-star at this point.
Right, exactly. So obviously, they're deep in a lot of different spots. I mean, anywhere you look, they got 2 or 3 guys that they could go to. I love the front court. You bring back PJ Washington and Nick Richards, but then you add EJ Montgomery. And I think maybe the guy that could put them over the hump into, an elite team is Reed Travis, who's a grad transfer from Stanford, and it brings, some much needed experience to obviously a young roster. So obviously the talent is there, Blake, but what are the areas do you think this team is really going to excel? Everywhere? Or
I'm telling you, and it seems like we say this a lot, and I don't say this a lot. I'm one that tries not to say, I try not to go down this road because I know where it leads sometimes. But with Kentucky, let's say with a Duke, with a Kansas, you always kind of say, oh, this could be one of, Coach K's better teams. This could be one of Bill Self's better teams. This could be one of John Calipari's better teams. And I really believe that. He's had a lot of great teams come through there, as we know. But when you just look at the makeup of the team on paper, because with Kentucky, my question is always going to be the same year in and year out as long as John Calipari is there. How is the chemistry? Because that matters when you have all these new guys. And as we've seen, hasn't always been perfect. It's taken them a while sometimes to kind of put everything together. Look at last year. Sometimes it takes a little while. But with this team, that front court, holy cow, they're just – you're too deep at every position. And it's like, I don't know what you do because if PJ Washington goes out of the game, if Nick Richards goes out of the game, You've got Reed Travis. You got DJ Montgomery. It's like you're not really falling off. And that goes back now to what will be the thing that a lot of people question. I think that's the shooting. We always talk about how do you beat Kentucky when you have all these big guys. Well, you try to play a zone and you just hope for the best and hope they can't shoot. Well, Tyler Hero comes in, a really, really good shooter. You've got the guys they have coming back. You've got Ashton Hagens coming in, Emmanuel Quickly. They're really fast. They're really
even
good off
the
Green
is a good three-point shooter.
Exactly. Quade Green's back, and he's kind of one I think people forget about because you look at the guys they have coming in. Man, they have potential to be really, really good. I think if you ask me today, you can make the case for other teams in terms of around the country, but if Kentucky plays up to what we think they can be, they can be a number one team in the country, national championship type of team, as long as that chemistry's there. Because it looks like, again, on paper, it looks like this could really be one of his better teams.
You mentioned chemistry, and you might say John Calipari has an easy job because he brings in all this talent, and anybody could coach that. But when you have to start over every single year, that's pretty tough to do. A lot of these other coaches, have 3-4 juniors and they come back the next year, and you don't have to start over. And I feel like a guy like him, and even at Duke now, where you just keep bringing in freshmen, lottery picks, you have to start over every year. And I think that's a really tough part of the job.
It absolutely is. And people who maybe just look at it on the surface and don't really think deeper into the whole situation and kind of all the dynamics that go into it. Right. Think about this too. And I'm not saying anyone has I'm not saying these guys are egotistical or anything like that, but Tony, if I was a 5-star player and I had spent my entire high school career getting the ball on every single play, scoring 25 points, 35 points a game, right. And then I go into Kentucky and let's say I'm told, hey, you're going to be our second guy off the bench. That's a hard thing to do, and that's a hard thing that I would struggle to adjust to. But somehow, as a coach, the job has always been you have to get guys to embrace their roles. Sometimes that could be easier with guys who maybe aren't these, all 5-star, all-star level talents. But when you have these guys, everyone wants to play because everybody, if you're at that level, you think you've got a chance to be in the NBA. And it's like, well, if I'm coming off the bench, no, who's going to see me? Like, they're not going to think that I'm, and there's so many different things like that goes into it. So I think managing personalities, managing expectations, that is one of the toughest things you can do as a coach when you have a team like that. And that's why I've always said you can criticize John Calipari any way you want in whatever area you want. But in terms of being able to get all of these guys on the same page, I think he does a really, really good job with that every single year. Even if maybe they don't win the national championship, he does a really good job of being able to get these guys to buy into their roles. I just think that's a really tough thing to do, especially nowadays.
Yeah, I think like a kid like Nick Richards is a good example of that, where he was an absolute star in high school. He comes to Kentucky and he plays 14 minutes a night. That's got to be tough for his psyche. It's got to be a huge adjustment on that kid, and for Calipari to handle that with so many different players, I think that's maybe one of the more impressive things about him.
And you look down the bench and you're looking at your teammates and you're saying, oh, well, that guy's going to the NBA. He just got drafted 27th. He's guaranteed $1 million this year or whatever. And it's like, why wasn't that me? And it just does. It weighs on you as a high school kid. I mean, I could imagine myself in that situation. I was probably more of the 1-star caliber, but I mean, hey, I can only imagine being in that spot and knowing that it's a tough thing to do. So that's why all the people that knock these guys that, have these top level players and say, oh, well, I could roll the ball out there and do fine with these guys. It's just not the case. That there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a lot more dynamics at play.
Absolutely. I have them winning the league this year. And I think this is probably the best team on paper since the 2015 team. Do you agree with that, Blake?
I think it's yeah. I mean, and I do. I would put them at 1 today. Like I said earlier, I could interchange them, Auburn and Tennessee, but it's hard not to look at Kentucky and feel like they are going to be back where they kind of have always been. Even if they'll lose some SEC games just because the league's tough, but they're still going to be really, really good.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about LSU next. First off, the thing that jumps out to me is how fast Will Wade has kind of remade this roster. And even last year with a pretty a solid roster, I think they definitely went above and beyond in the expectation department. So he fixes the roster here. He brings in Tremont Waters last year. He's already one of the best point guards in the country. And then this 2018 class is just ridiculous. I mean, you have guys like Naz Reid, Javonte Smart, Emmett Williams, Darius Days. You have a few JUCO kids coming in as well. Let's not forget, Johnny Jones also brought in a lot of talent, but it didn't really translate into W's. I think you're going to see that happen with Will Wade. I think you saw it last year. I mean, they were in the NCAA tournament hunt for most of the season. I'm definitely excited about this group. How can you not be, especially coming off last year? They won 18 games. I don't think people expected that. They got an NIT berth, so I think that was a good first year for Coach Wade. Shows you, obviously, he knows what he's doing. What do you think about this year's team? I'm really excited. They're going to be pretty young, but, I mean, you can't knock the talent.
No, you can, and youth is will be a theme for a lot of these different teams. We've already talked about a couple of them. Is you're going to have some of these teams that have high expectations. Kentucky always is the case. They're always young, but you have a team like LSU, a Vanderbilt team, which we'll talk about later, that are going to be relying on a lot of underclassmen. And I think you always have questions there in terms of, is that going to matter when you go up against maybe more experienced teams that have guys that have been through this grind for 2 or 3 years now. But the freshman class is loaded. And I think he's got the type of players to fit how they want to play. And look at his background coming from VCU. The way he wants to play is he wants to cause havoc on the defensive end of the floor. He wants to be able to turn that into offense, but you also want to have players that can get up down the floor in transition and do so many different things. And he's got a very, very athletic team. He's got a playmaker in Tremont Waters, but he also has a lot around him. And I think that's what's going to be the thing everybody looks at and says, even if LSU is rolling out a sophomore and 4 freshmen on the floor at the same time, you're still going to feel like they've got a pretty good chance to beat people. And it is just a matter of seeing, because you don't always know. And we just had to talk about the 5-star stuff and all that, but you don't always know how guys are going to adjust. You could be a star this or star that, but you don't know kind of how they're going to adjust to certain parts of the game at the college level. And I don't really have many question marks with the guys he has coming in, but the chemistry I think will be there. And let's look at this too. The thing, Wade Sims, just a tragic situation with what happened to him. You just can't ever believe that kind of stuff. You can't ever wrap your head around that kind of stuff either. So you've got a team right now that's hurting, but you look at it too, and it's like, man, those guys are going to be really close together. I think that chemistry is going to be there, knowing what they've been through with a situation like this. I just think that Will Wade he has that infectious type of energy. He has that personality you need to get guys to buy in, because they bought in last year. And I think he's not going to have any problem getting them to buy in this year with these guys that they're going to have on the floor, several guys who will be playing at the NBA level in a year or two. They've got the talent, and I think it's just a matter of seeing, can they jump some of these other teams? It's just going to depend on maybe how they play on the road, because they are going to be young, and maybe how quickly some of these other pieces come together.
Yeah, well, the good news is it all starts with Tremont Waters. What a fantastic freshman year he had. He got to, kind of learn on the job. He gained a lot of confidence. He was so good late too. I think in his last 5 SEC games, he averaged 22 points and almost 7 assists. His playmaking really is a huge boost for this club. What do you think of Waters?
Yeah, he makes everybody better. I think that's the best way. We always say that sometimes about players and stuff, but he's a prime example. With just, I mean, when the ball's in his hands, it's just like, I mean, he can do anything, and you feel that way, and that's something. If you're a teammate of his, you got to feel really good about, because it's like he can find the right guy. He can do the things that you need to do to be a really elite level point guard. But he can also score. He gets to the lane. He can shoot. He's going to make these guys better. He's going to make everyone on the team better. And is having a guy like that you can go through in these clutch situations. We remember the shots he hit last year. You know, the one at Texas A&M is the one that stands out the most, where he hits the 30-something footer and just kind of heaves it up and makes it. They win at Texas A&M. So yeah, when you have a player like that, everything can go through. He's your coach on the floor. He's basically Will Wade on the court. That's what you want out of your point guard. Waters has all the tools you need, and he's going to be one of the better point guards, not just in the SEC, but I think on a national level too.
Now, with Tremont Waters at the 1, they bring in Javonte Smart, who is a combo guard, I believe, really talented kid. Is he going to be okay at the 2 spot? Is he better in that position, do you think? Or how do you think they'll use Smart this year?
See, here's how I kind of envision Will Wade wanting things to look like. And I'm not speaking for him, but I think this is how, when you look at the type of style they play, you almost feel like there's times where you want to have 2 point guards on the floor, because you feel like that's not only going to help you on the offensive end of the floor, but it's kind of going to help you on the defensive end of the floor too. So I feel like that's something they can rely on, to where if you have several guys out there that certainly can handle the ball really well, and a guy like Waters Smart can too, he's going to be able to play both of those guys on the floor at the same time. And he's got, because you do have all these wing guys, you have the interior guys that you can work with on the roster. And so I think that's going to be one of the more kind of, I guess, entertaining dynamics of this entire team, is watching Waters and Smart play off of each other. You still got Skylar Mays in the mix too. Darrell Edwards, I thought, really improved down the stretch last year. So even with a lot of focus going to be on these new guys that are bigger and able to play on the wing or play inside, you've still got a bunch of really good guards there that I think fit Will Wade's sort of style of play.
Yeah, and I think another addition they have coming in this year that's kind of flown under the radar is Cavell Bigby Williams, who is a transfer from Oregon. Yep. Excellent shot blocker, excellent defender. I think a senior fits perfectly right next to those young bigs.
Yep, I think so too, and I think he'll use him in creative ways, just to kind of be able to have a big body in there, because you're going to need that when we talk about all the guys that are in the SEC, the Reed Travis, Austin Wiley, and we'll get to more of them. But there's a lot of good big men, Dante Hall, and you've got to have some guys in there that can kind of bang in there and kind of go at it with these other big guys that are going to be physical presence for these other teams. So. I think they've got a lot of length and they got a lot of athleticism, and that's you love that in a team that has the playmakers that they do. When you combine all those elements together, that just kind of shows you. And you see LSU in some of these spots, maybe in the top 15, top 20 in a lot of these preseason polls. It's hard to disagree with that. Just as long as, like I mentioned, as long as you can rely on these guys that are younger, knowing that. There'll be some times where there'll be some frustrations when you have younger guys. They're going to make mistakes, but LSU has a lot of really talented younger guys, and that's going to help the process.
Yeah, I mean, I have them at 18 in my top 25. I have them at 4 in my SEC rankings. The one slightly concerning thing, as you said, I think they're a little bit young. The youth is there, but the talent, you can't deny the talent. So I'm excited because we know Will Wade can coach. So
yep.
Definitely get some wins down there in Baton Rouge. So up next, we're going to talk about Mississippi State. This is another up and coming team in the conference. They had a very successful year last year. They went 25-12. They got to the Final Four of the NIT. I think we can all agree, Blake, this is absolutely probably the best team Ben Howland has had since he arrived in Starkville. I think this is going to be a huge year, though, not only for the program, but for Howland himself. I think this is year 4. It's time to get to the NCAA tournament. This is a backcourt heavy team. The Weatherspoon brothers are really, really good. I love Lamar Peters. He's rock solid. Tyson Carter's back there as well. You can't forget about that front court, though. Eric Holman is turning into a heck of a player. He's really starting to figure things out. He can really stretch the floor, shot the three really well last year. Abdul Ado is another, I think he's a breakout guy. I like this group a lot. Then you add in a guy like Reggie Perry. I think the talent's there. I think they're an NCAA tournament team. They're really good defensively. If they can maybe, improve on the offensive end, I think they could have a special year.
I think Mississippi State, the more I look at them, I think they have a really good shot to maybe be that team. We feel pretty good about Kentucky, Auburn, and Tennessee. I feel like they could kind of crash the party. I mean, you just look at this thing here, the roster itself. Oh, boy. You want to talk about size on a roster. Mississippi State has got a ton of size. They got a ton of athleticism. You mentioned Reggie Perry. You had a 6'10" guy to go along with Abdul Ado, 6'11", Eric Coleman, 6'10", EJ Datcher, 6'10". They've got the other JUCO kid they're bringing in, 6'10". And then you got some 6'8" guys across the board. You got some 6'7", Robert Woodard coming in. Man, they have got a lot of things to work with. And it is Ben Howland. We can't forget. I know they've had their struggles, but Ben Howland still knows how to coach. And they've kind of been preparing for a year like this. That process we always talk about, a rebuilding job is not always easy. It doesn't always happen in year one, doesn't always happen in year two, even in year three sometimes. It doesn't happen. Right. But he's got a team this year, I think, that can compete with anyone in the SEC. The guard play, the Weatherspoons, Lamar Peters, and all the big guys that we mentioned, they've got the pieces in place to really make a pretty significant, I think, run in March. They are one of those teams, like we talked about at the top, that can win multiple games. If everything stays together, you add the freshmen to the guys they have coming back. The biggest hesitation I have with them is probably the one I've had, over the past couple of years. And it's not that I don't think they have guys that can shoot, but they're going to have to prove that they can shoot better from outside. They shot 31.5% from three last year. That was one of the worst in the country. It was very low on the totem pole there in the nation. They weren't necessarily great sometimes at taking care of the ball, even with the guards they had. And they also didn't shoot free throws very well. So those are things you have to do to move yourself from good team to great team. And because of that run they made last year in the NIT, I think that gives them a lot of momentum in the offseason, bringing the guys they have coming in. I think Mississippi State can be really good. I'd put them in my top probably. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I could put them in my top 15 right now. I could say they're a number 15 type of team, definitely a top 20 type of team, because it does seem like they've got all the essentials that you need if they can shoot the ball, if they can kind of be better percentage-wise, that they're going to have a pretty tremendous year, I think.
Yeah, I have them at 19 in my preseason poll. I think that's right below LSU. I think both of these teams are going to be really, really good. I just think, they're going to be so difficult to score on in the paint. You have a guy like Holman, you have a guy like Adu. Both those guys averaged almost 2 blocks a game last year. And I think maybe offensively, you bring in Reggie Perry, who's a capable three-point shooter. As I said, Eric Holman shot 44% from three last year. That could open it up on the offensive end.
They've got, and that's versatility too. We talked about the athleticism and the size. They've got versatile guys who can score in multiple ways, and that's what you need. And it's not just the guards. It's not just Lamar Peters. It's not just Quindary Weatherspoon or Nick Weatherspoon. It's these other guys they have coming back and the guys they're bringing into. It's a breakthrough year. I think anything other than an NCAA tournament appearance this year would be a massive disappointment for this team. And it's not hard to play there in Starkville either. And it's going to be hard for teams to come in there and win. And that goes for Kentucky, Auburn, Tennessee, whoever. It's going to be hard to go in there and win. And I think that's something that you look at and say they're going to do a really good job, I think, holding serve at home. But they're now talented enough. They're more experienced now, where they've had the experience. They've been a young team for the past couple of years. They're more experienced now. And you just feel like they're primed to have a big season.
Yeah. I don't think there's any excuses this year, Blake. I think that roster has to get to the NCAA tournament.
Yep, I would be surprised if they're a team that's consistently out of the top 25. I think they have to be in there most of the year because I think they have a chance to really be that good.
Yep, I'm right there with you. It's going to be exciting. All right, up next, we're going to talk about Mizzou. They went 20-13 last year. They got knocked out in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So, looking back, I really feel like last year was kind of a disappointment. You lose Michael Porter right out of the gate. That was just a huge blow. I think a lot of people thought this team was going to be really, really good, and then you lose a lottery pick in Porter right out of the gate, as I said, and unfortunately, they just didn't meet expectations. Unfortunately, so looking ahead to this year, they're probably going to take a step back. They still have some nice pieces. I think Jonte Porter is a special kid. I think he's going to have a big time year. Kevin Purrier is back. He's rock solid. His numbers will probably go up again this year. Jordan Geist, Jeremiah Tillman is a possible breakout candidate. But again, I just think this team is probably going to be kind of in that maybe 8 to 10 range in the conference, which isn't terrible, but maybe not NCAA tournament worthy. What do you think about the Tigers this year?
Yeah, I think they're a bubble team if everything
Yeah.
kind of comes together. I think that's probably the height for me. When you just compare them now, at least right now, here at the 1st of October, when you compare them to the other teams, it's hard to rank Missouri higher than that at this point because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get from their guards and all the great guards we've already talked about. You're searching for that if you're Missouri, and when these teams pressure like an LSU, like a Mississippi State who has the length, like Auburn, who plays the way they do, is Missouri going to have enough good guard play to be able to combat that? And I don't know that they are at this point. And I think that's going to be the thing. Even as good as Jonte Porter is, even as good as Jeremiah Tillman is, I think both of those guys are going to be among the better big men in the country. I think Tillman could have a really big year. And it's a roster that has several players that can make an impact on a night in and night out basis. It's just that guard play is what's going to kind of, I think, drive me nuts at times with them probably this year because you see it, you see the potential elsewhere, but you want to be able to see that consistency from their guards, and it's hard to rank them above some of these other teams because they had turnovers last year, even with Cassius Robertson. They had turnover issues. I think they averaged 14 turnovers per game, somewhere in there, and that was pretty low nationally. And they shot a lot of threes last year. So you take away some of those dynamics, and it's like you don't maybe necessarily know what you're going to get with them, but they still have a lot of size, and everything's going to go through Porter. We know that. And you just want to see, I think, how the other stuff comes on around them. If Konzo Martin, to give him credit, no one could have predicted last year was going to go the way it did. No one could have predicted that Michael Porter was going to play 2 minutes the entire season until the SEC tournament. I think still to get them to the tournament was pretty somewhat underrated in terms of the coaching job just to get them there because of how much they knew they were going to rely on him. But that gave Jonte Porter a chance to kind of emerge. Cassius Robertson was really good. So I think for Missouri, it's just replacing that offense, production from an offensive standpoint of Robertson, and just being able to deal with the grind and the pressure of the night in, night out basis in terms of guard play in the SEC. And I think until those questions are answered, it's probably hard to kind of look at Missouri and say, well, that's a definite NCAA tournament team, even with someone like Porter and Tillman on the roster.
Yeah, a player that I do like is Jordan Geist. I think he's a solid guard. I think he's going to see a pretty prominent role with this team this year. Is he somebody who could maybe run the show for the Tigers, do you think?
I mean, I think he has to, sort of. I mean, Jordan Geist, kind of someone that he's always been like that hard-nosed type of player, and you feel like you can rely on him. And they're going to have to. Like I said, I mean, they really don't have a choice. They're going to have to rely on him and kind of hope that he can be that leader they need on the floor. He was, I think, in the SEC last year, one of the better assist turnover ratios. But they're also going to look to some of their guards from a freshman standpoint. Someone like Torrance Watson, who's from St. Louis. He was a really high volume scorer in high school. They need those guys to come on. And there's KJ Santos, the UIC transfer, who's 6'8", but he's kind of a wing type of player. I think he's one of the more intriguing pieces. Just talked to Sam Snelling over at Rock M Nation. I had him on the Southeast Hoops podcast here recently, and we talked about that. I think Santos is kind of that wild card in terms of how he's able to contribute. If they can get those guys like Watson, Santos, guys like that are kind of playing above maybe what the expectations are, they can be a team that could finish, 6th to 8th in the SEC maybe. But I think right now it's kind of a wait and see mode on them.
Yeah, I think Javon Pickett could be a pretty key player for them this year as well. I think he sat out last year with an injury, correct?
Let's see. Pickett is he's a freshman guy that I think they're high on too. But I think there's several of those guys. Like I said, I think they're going to look at this group. And Conzo Martin, we talked about the coaching job he did last year, and he had to be more creative last year. I think when you go into a season thinking how everything's going to run with Michael Porter Jr. on the floor, you have to be creative. And I think he's going to have to be really creative this year. And I think that's something that their fans will kind of wait and see on, because you want to see how their offense progresses and kind of are there things they can do to accentuate the positives for some of these guys and be able to take care of the ball, because that's what's going to come down to. Can they take care of the ball and put themselves in a position where Jonte Porter can really succeed? Because if they're turning the ball over on a consistent rate, you're only going to hurt everybody else's value. So we'll kind of see what happens there.
Yeah, I have them in the 9 spot. I think that's a good spot for them. Like you said, I think they're a bubble team. I think maybe that's their ceiling this year, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully some of those guards can step up and give them the production that they need. So let's move on here. We're going to talk about Ole Miss next. So obviously the Andy Kennedy era is over at Ole Miss. All in all, I thought Andy Kennedy did a really good job there. They were always in the tournament hunt, always winning about 20 games a year. So just time to move on, I guess. Sometimes it's just time. And so obviously they bring in Kermit Davis, who's an excellent basketball coach. He did a fantastic job at Middle Tennessee State. Always had that team in the NCAA tournament hunt. They even won a few games the last few years. Certainly might take a year or two to kind of right the ship, but he does have a few solid pieces to work with this year. Terrence Davis is back. He's an all-league guy. Brian Tyree and Devontae Shuler have a lot of potential. They have a pretty solid big and Bruce Stevens up front. I think we're going to see a lot of newcomers this year, though, in the rotation. Guys like Franco Miller, Blake Hinson. So you never know. Davis can maybe coach these guys up, and maybe they can make a little bit of noise. Or what are you thinking about the Rebels this year, Blake?
Yeah, with Ole Miss, I think the thing I would say is I'd probably be surprised if they finish last, because I just feel like Kermit Davis is kind of going to bring an edge to them. And I do think there's enough pieces on this roster for them to win some games, and not necessarily, like we said, not putting themselves in NCAA tournament contention. I think that may be a little hard to do. But they do. I think Terrence Davis, when you look at him, the efficiency just maybe needing to be a little more consistent with his shot, but he's still someone that can score at such a high rate when he gets going. Brian Tyree, a guy like that. Bruce Stevens really liked his development last year, but you said it in terms of you never really know, because you have a team that has so many new guys and they're going to have new faces. You got a new system. There's a lot of new. And sometimes that's not a good thing, but sometimes it can be, in terms of if everything kind of clicks quicker than you expect it to. The biggest problem Ole Miss has had over the years really is they've never really been efficient on defense. They've had their moments, sure, but they've never consistently kind of been at that level. And that seems like was sort of the thing that kind of held them back the most, maybe for a lot of the time towards the end of the Andy Kennedy era. And not to – Andy Kennedy did a lot more for that program, I think, that people will give him credit for, putting them in a position that they were in, knowing how tough of a job that is. That's one of the toughest jobs in the SEC, if not the toughest job. You talk about building a consistent winner on a night in and night out basis. Now they've got the beautiful pavilion there. The facilities are upgraded. He did so much for that program, even if they didn't have the NCAA tournament success they wanted. But now it's in a good position to kind of take that next step forward, I think. And if they can play more efficient defense, which I think they'll do under Kermit Davis, and be more efficient on offense too, and kind of shot selection is important. It seems like sometimes in the past, maybe that's just kind of, they just had guys that could score and you just kind of pass it up and you take the first shot you can get at times. But a lot of teams do that. But I think shot selection is going to be important, especially in a year like this where every little thing's going to matter just because of how close the competition is in the SEC. I could see Ole Miss kind of sneaking up a little bit on some people, having a chance to play. And that's just knowing Kermit Davis, knowing the type of style he coaches and kind of the way he's going to have those guys playing, even if maybe they are less talented than other teams at certain positions. I just think that they are going to have a bit of an edge to them, and we'll kind of see what happens there.
I can't see them being terrible on defense under Kermit Davis. I mean, last year they were 306th in the country in scoring defense. They were 319th in three-point defense. Team shot 38% behind the arc on the Rebels, so they got to get a lot better at that end of the floor. I'm excited about some of these new guys, though. As you said, Franco Miller's a guy who scored almost 30 points a game last year, and so and Devontae Shuler and Breein Tyree are two kids that maybe it's time. Maybe they're going to break out this year, and if that happens, then they're going to be in a lot better shape than I think a lot of people think.
Yeah, you go up and down the roster. I think Blake Henson's someone, you mentioned him earlier. Kermit Davis, very high on him. I think really talk about maturity levels. You always want to see that with a freshman. I think he's someone he's very high on. You just go down the board. I mean, someone like Brian Hallams, got Carlos Curry, very athletic guy, 6'11". There is KJ Buffin. There's a lot of guys on this roster that we just don't know enough about right now to be able to know exactly how they're going to play. But hey, I'll lean towards Kermit Davis. Like I said, if I have concerns, I still feel like his history, what he's been able to do over the years, he knows it's a process. He knows it's going to take time. But I'd be surprised if we're, looking up in, let's say, February, and Ole Miss isn't giving people problems. I think they're going to be one of those teams that kind of like talk about being a thorn in the side sometimes. I think they could be one of those teams when we're talking about getting better and better towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have them in the 12 spot, but I think I could easily see them creeping up maybe to the 8 or 9 possibly. You never know. I mean, Kermit Davis, I think, is that good a coach. So I'm excited. I think he's going to get that program humming and pretty quickly. So let's move on here, Blake. We're going to talk about South Carolina next. So after a very surprising run to the Final Four 2 years ago, they took a pretty sizable step back last year. I think everybody saw that coming. They lost a lot of production from that Final Four team. So Frank Martin kind of trying to start this thing over here, trying to get this team back on track. There is a little bit of promise this year. Chris Silver returns, who's one of the better big men in the conference. Kid I really like, and I think could be a breakout this year, is Justin Minaya. I like his game. I like his left-handed stroke. There's some other pieces returning also solid, but are they going to get enough from those guys to get back into the NCAA tournament discussion? I'm not sure. They do bring in TJ Moss, who looks like a possible immediate contributor. Trey Campbell is a Georgetown transfer, but he's probably more of a role player. AJ Lawson is a talented kid coming in. What do you think about the Gamecocks?
I think it's all offense is where we're going to have our concerns. And defensively, we know how they're going to play. They're coached by Frank Martin. They're going to play hard. They're going to be tough. They're probably going to commit some fouls, and they're going to be physical. And I think that's an edge you can have because we talk about all the different newcomers around the SEC. You got a lot of freshmen in a lot of places. And as much as freshmen, in high school, they're scoring, they're doing all this, sometimes you're not exactly prepared for the physicality, especially in a league like the SEC. And I think that's where South Carolina can find an advantage. And that's how they play. Even a couple years ago, we talked about them getting to the Final Four. They would out tough people. And if they can kind of continue to have that, that's going to help them. But they have to have more. And they have to have more of that from a guard perspective. We know what Chris Silva is going to do. He's going to have a chance to be an SEC Player of the Year type of candidate, I think. It's been fun watching his progress over the past couple of years. But you have to have more around him. You have to have guys that you can lean on and feel like, you can have that solid punch. Justin Minaya, like you mentioned, I think is someone who can have a breakout year. I think you're going to put him on that short list of guys in the SEC that you say are probably candidates to really maybe surpass expectations or kind of become not necessarily a household name, but someone that is going to jump on everyone's radar. But they have newcomers too, and we've talked about that at these other spots. Newcomers, you look at them, you can look at their stats, but until you put them on the floor with the guys that you have coming back, like Silva, like Mike Kotsar, you just don't ever know. And I think that's kind of what you're going to wait and see on South Carolina. They're another wait and see team for me, just because you want to see how things come along from an offensive standpoint, because if they can do that, they're going to be better, and they're going to be physical, like we said. And they're going to have that toughness that all Frank Martin teams too. But they have to shoot the ball better, and they have to be more efficient on offense. I think last year they were 43.5% from two. That wasn't very good, and then they have to be able to just shoot, period, because if not, teams are going to they're going to double up Silva. They're going to make South Carolina shoot the ball every chance they get, and that's where you see all these newcomer guards, like you mentioned, like a Lawson. Campbell comes in. There's other guys they're going to add. I think you want to see what kind of tweaks are made on the offensive end of the floor, and if that can kind of provide the consistency that they need there.
Yeah, I just think they're going to need one or maybe even two of those newcomers to play significant roles if they want to get to back toward the NCAA tournament discussion. Maya Kotsar is somebody last year who I pegged as possibly a breakout candidate. He didn't really seem to improve as much as I thought he would. Were you surprised by that?
Yeah, and I think it's because he did play, and I don't want to say he played a huge role, but he played a role in that Final Four team. He played down the stretch in the tournament games. He was someone you felt like he gave them quality minutes, but it just seemed like it never really got there last year. And can he take that next step forward? Yeah, sure, he still can. But they do. They need a lot out of him this year, and he's got to be someone that takes that pressure off of Silva because, as I said, we know what the game plan is going to be for opposing teams. They're going to go at Silva. You want to try to get him in foul trouble because when Chris Silva's not on the floor, what are they going to do? And I think they're going to have more answers to that this year maybe than they did last year. For me, I think I went into the season last year. I think I picked South Carolina 13th. Everybody thought I was crazy. But you just saw that maybe that depth wasn't there. I do feel like they're going to be a better team this year. I don't really have any doubts about that. How far they're able to move up in the SEC, that remains to be seen just because the rest of the league's gotten better too. And it's like, can they close the gap enough to be able to move back into that possible NCAA tournament type of territory?
Yeah, they have a lot of question marks for me. So out of the gate, I have them in the 13th spot. Certainly could creep up a few spots there if they figured things out. But right now, I just think too many question marks for the Gamecocks. So moving on here, we're going to talk about Tennessee next. And what a year for Tennessee. Honestly, probably I'd say outside of Ohio State and probably Clemson, Tennessee was probably the biggest surprise in college basketball last year. As you know, I certainly thought they were going to be much improved, but I didn't expect them to win the league like they did. Rick Barnes has already kind of turned this program around in a really small amount of time. And I don't think you're going to see much change this year, Blake. I think, pretty much return all of their production except for, I believe, James Daniel, who was a solid reserve guard for them last year. I love the backcourt depth. I think they have one of the best duos in the country in Admiral Schofield and Grant Williams. There's just so much to like about this team. There's a lot of experience. They played a ton of juniors and seniors. So I think you're going to see the same type of year from Tennessee. I think they're going to be really, really good.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, man, at the top of the SEC, these teams, everybody they have coming back, it's just like, my goodness, you can see all these teams as Final Four type of contenders. And it's just, with Tennessee, the biggest thing that stood out to me last year was just the toughness. A team that they're not loaded with 5 stars. They're not even loaded with 4 stars. It's a team where that's what we talk about when we say these rankings things. You can look at the rankings and they do a really good job, and you feel pretty good, for the most part, that guys are going to come in and contribute. But you have a team like Tennessee that just goes out and outworks everyone. And that's what they did. They just outworked everybody. They're a hard-nosed, tough team. They never got rattled, really. And I think those are the intangibles. We talk about great teams have talent and all that, but you have to have the intangibles. And that's why Tennessee was so good last year. They were so efficient on defense. They made that like their pride and joy. They were not going to let teams come out and just score on them at will because they knew what type of style was going to make them successful. And they were able to play that. And people say what they want about Rick Barnes, and maybe Texas fans got tired of him or whatever, but you still got a guy who's won over 650 games. You got 23 NCAA tournament appearances, I think, now at this point. You get your top 6 scorers back from a team that shared the SEC regular season title. They shot 38% from 3. They had a really tough strength of schedule last year, and yet they still had all that success. I don't know how you could go into the season and not say that Tennessee is a preseason top 10 team. And I think with them, and not necessarily in the same manner, but just like with Auburn, the mindset. You come out, you kind of defy the odds, you prove everybody wrong. You want to be able to continue that mindset. And I think that's something Rick Barnes can do a really good job at, is kind of keeping them, kind of having that motivation, knowing that they have bigger fish to fry now in terms of not just making the NCAA tournament, not just, capturing a part of the SEC regular season title, but they're wanting to make a Final Four. And I think they really do have a really good chance to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a team. This isn't 1 or 2 guys and a bunch of role players surrounding them. Their top 6, 7 guys are all juniors and seniors, and each one of them can score 15, 20 points on any given night and really hurt you. So, if Grant Williams is off, somebody else can step up. If Jordan Bowden's off, you can see Lamont Turner step up. So they have so many weapons, so many different guys they can go to. Just a ton of experience. I love this team. I have them right behind Kentucky. I wouldn't be shocked if they win the league. I have them at 2, but I think Kentucky's talent you kind of have to put them a step above. But yeah, I think you're going to see pretty much the same type of success this year as they had last year, and I think you're going to see a deeper NCAA tournament run.
Yeah, I think so. I just think it's hard to see them taking a big step back or anything. Everybody's comes back, and knowing the personalities and the way they play, Tennessee has everything pretty much you're looking for in the ultimate team. Like you just mentioned, they're the ultimate team, and there's someone, they have a superstar, but he's not really, like, you don't really consider Grant Williams like just this superstar type of player. Like I mentioned, he just goes out and outworks everyone. And that's why he was, an SEC player of the year last year, because he just went out and outworked everyone. And he's just got such a smooth game. So they do. Tennessee has all the pieces, and I would be surprised if they're not right there in the mix for an SEC title and having a chance to go pretty far in March.
Yeah, he might have been the quietest SEC player of the year award winner ever.
Hardly ever. He wasn't even recruited much out of high school. It's crazy to think about that.
Unbelievable. And he's such a strong guy in the paint. I love his game. As I said, him and Schofield what an incredible duo those 2 guys are. So let's move on here, Blake. We're going to talk about Texas A&M next. For all that went wrong with Texas A&M season last year, suspensions, injuries, they finished with 22 wins and they got to the Sweet 16. So for everything, all the distractions and all the injuries, as I said, for them to make a deep NCAA tournament run, I think it was a great way to finish the season for the Aggies. Unfortunately, I think this year it's going to be a little bit more difficult to win ball games. As you know, they lose so many key players: Tyler Davis, DJ Hogue, Robert Williams, Tony Troche Morelos. Also, Dwayne Wilson is gone as well. So cupboard's kind of bare here. I don't know how you feel about the Aggies. I'm a big Admon Gilder guy, always have been. I think him and TJ Starks are going to kind of lead this team offensively, kind of on both ends of the floor probably. But, what do you see from Texas A&M? Do you think they could maybe surprise this year, or do you think it's going to be a pretty rough year for Texas A&M?
I think it's hard to tell, and they have to be lumped in with some of these other teams we've talked about in terms of having more question marks maybe than answers right now, because it's going to look so different than what we're used to. We're used to seeing Texas A&M have Tyler Davis and Robert Williams on the floor and have these big guys that really everything goes through. Even as well as Starks and Gilder played last year, everything still went through Robert Williams and Tyler Davis. And now it's like you look at it, you don't know. It's like beyond those two proven guys that played those key roles last year, what else do you feel like you have that consistency elsewhere? And I think a couple guys to keep your eye on is Christian Mekawulu, who comes over from Tennessee State. He's going to provide some experience, and he's a double-double type of guy. I know that was at the OVC level, but I still, being in Nashville, had a chance to see him play a lot. He's someone that's going to help them. Kind of that transition. He's not going to be Tyler Davis. He's not going to be Robert Williams, but I do think he's going to help them kind of in that transition in terms of what he can do because he can block shots. He was pretty efficient from the floor. So he'll help them in a lot of different areas. Josh Nebo, another guy, I think will really help him on the defensive end of the floor, comes over from St. Francis. So it's like you got these guys who are going to step in and be able to help them right away. Billy Kennedy did say this summer that they're going to try to play a lot faster, and they have to because they're not going to have to slow the game down anymore, to pound the ball down on the block and use post guys. They're going to have to play faster, kind of like he did when he was at Murray State. So I think that makes Texas A&M pretty intriguing from that regard. Look, we saw Auburn. I mean, and I'm not comparing them to Auburn. Please don't get me wrong, but you know what I mean in terms of like playing at a faster tempo and what that can do to kind of close the gap sometimes if you don't, necessarily have the depth at times. Teams that are able to play faster, you give yourself more possessions, you give yourself more opportunities. So I think Texas A&M is kind of a team to watch just in terms of that and seeing how they play. Their playing style is going to kind of dictate how the season goes for them. But like you're saying, I think there's just a lot of unknowns right now.
I just keep going back to that key losses and looking at that list of guys, as I said, Davis, Hogue, Williams, Wilson. That's just a lot of production to replace for any school. So I think Savion Flagg might be a guy that could maybe step in, maybe slide into that DJ Hogue role as a sharpshooter. He's got some size at the guard position, so you'll probably see him, play some significant minutes for this team. But again, like you said, just one of these other teams that just a lot of question marks. We just kind of have to wait and see.
Yeah, and they were a poor shooting team anyways last year, and that's probably the more concerning thing is they didn't really shoot the ball well from three. They didn't shoot free throws well. And it's like you're probably going to go to a more guard-oriented team this year, but you have to shoot the ball better. And if they can do that, if their percentages go up, if some of these guys can help out the younger guys plus the newcomers, they may be okay, but it's just depth, I think, is probably the biggest concern right now.
Yeah, for sure. I have Texas A&M finishing 10th, which wouldn't be, a huge spot out of the NCAA tournament conversation, but you never know. We'll see. All right, so we're going to finish up the podcast here. Final team of the night, we're going to talk about the Vanderbilt Commodores, coming off a pretty, disappointing season, obviously. And this is another team that loses a lot of production. Jeff Roberson, who was one of the best players for them the last few years. Riley LaChance, an excellent point guard. Matthew Fisher-Davis. Peyton Willis is also gone as well. But there's still a lot of buzz around the program because they bring in a Darius Garland. They bring in a Simi Shitu. So they have two, I think, 5-star recruits coming in. But do they have enough around those two guys to get back in the NCAA tournament conversation? I'm not sure. I would probably lean towards no. I think they'll be an exciting team because of the prospects they have. But Bryce Drew is certainly bringing in talent. He might just need another year to put it all together.
I think Vanderbilt is kind of in that, of all the teams we've talked about, I think they're kind of in that in-between in that you could see them really being really good. But if they don't get the kind of level of play around these guys that we're talking about, the 5-star prospects, you could see them kind of struggling a bit. I would probably lean more towards them having a chance to be really, really good. And here's why. I think Garland is going to really come in from day one. And when you turn on an SEC game, you're going to say, wow, I need to watch Darius Garland play basketball because I think he's that good. And a lot of comparisons have been made over the summer just of him and the type of kind of skill set that he possesses and what he's going to be able to bring to that team. And I think that's going to help drive Vanderbilt right where Bryce Drew wants them to be in terms of how they play on the court. It's taken him a little while to put a system in. You got to get your players in there. And I think Darius Garland is exactly the kind of player they want. To do that, Semi Shittu is a very versatile forward. He can step out. He can, he handles the ball well. He can see the floor very well for a big guy. He's a future NBA player too. And so you build around those guys. Saban Lee comes back. I'm really excited to see how he expands his game. Max Evans is another guy in that sophomore class. But I also think you should keep your eye on the other freshman that people are probably talking about less, and that is Aaron Nesmith. He is a very athletic wing that can shoot the ball. He can be a knockdown shooter for them. He can score he can score in a lot of different ways, and I think he's going to be able to help them a lot too. Wouldn't be surprised if all three of those freshmen are playing a ton of minutes by the time the season ends, which Garland and Shittu are going to – that's obviously it seems like a given at this point. They're going to be starting from day one. Don't know about Nesmith, but I'd be surprised if he's not in there by the end of the season, really being a major contributor on that team. Matt Ryan, the Notre Dame transfer, can shoot it. Yanni Wetzel, a big guy who's a newcomer as well. He's a big guy, but he's able to step out and knock down shots. I'm not going to say he's Luke Cornett, but he is someone who at that size can step out, make shots from the perimeter. Joe Toy, you and I, we're just waiting, right? And I think it's still there. That potential is still there for him. If he can have a big year, if he can find that consistency, that really would help them big time because they're relying on a lot of underclassmen. The main theme here seems like we keep going back to that. All these guys are really good, but a lot of these guys are still sophomore freshmen. And if you want to compete in the upper tier, you got to grow up quick. And that's where you can have someone like Toy who has been around the block. He's been in this league now for several years. And even though he's had his ups and downs, you still feel like he can be a pretty good player. So that's what it comes down to for Vanderbilt. They've got some good pieces on the roster. It's just they're still young, and that youth has to come together pretty quickly. If it does, I think Vanderbilt could, realistically, I think they could be up there 5-6 in the SEC, be a top 25 team, be an NCAA tournament lock. If they don't get that help around those guys, then you could see them kind of maybe disappointing a little bit and having their ups and downs, even as good as Garland and Shittu, I think are going to be right away.
Yeah, I have him in the 8th spot just based on their newcomers being so talented. So, you're right, though. They could finish 5th or 6th. They could finish 11th or 12th. So it's going to be interesting. Do you think both Garland and Shittu are one-and-done guys, do you think?
If you ask me today, I would say probably. I think both of them probably are. You never know, I guess, till the season goes along. But I think there's probably a better chance than not that both of them are. And Bryce Drew's already done a good job. He's got 2 4-star guys lined up for next year. I think they're ranked 20th, the 2019 class. So he's nailing it on the recruiting trail. He's doing a really good job. And getting these 2 guys, it's going to be a lot of fun, I think, for Vanderbilt fans to see a class like this, the best class rankings-wise they've ever had. And it's going to be very intriguing. I look forward to watching them play, locally here in Nashville. I do. I think they have a chance to be good. And I think Garland is kind of going to be one of those guys that he's going to make everything go, and he's going to be highly entertaining.
Yeah, Memorial Gym is on my bucket list. I got to get there someday to watch a game.
Yep.
I love that. That place looks like it'd be a heck of a place to watch a basketball game.
Unlike anything else, it is. It's an experience.
All right. So that's going to finally wrap up the team previews tonight. I tell you, the ACC and the SEC, so many teams, so many things to talk about. So I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, Blake, before we finish up. So we're going to talk some Player of the Year picks here. Who are you going with? I'm going with Tremont Waters. especially I think if LSU can creep into that top 4, which I think they will this year, and get into the NCAA tournament. He's just an incredible playmaker. I was so impressed with him last year. I think Tremont Waters would be my pick. There's so many guys you could go with. I mean, the list is 10 miles long. I think Jalen Hudson might be in the mix too, because I think he's going to have a special season offensively. And if Florida has a special season, I think he could be in the conversation as well. Who's somebody that you would maybe look to as a player of the year in the SEC? Hello?
Hey, sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to win SEC Player of the Year in back-to-back years. Grant Williams, I love the guy though, and it's like, man, he could have another really, really good year, I think, and be right up there. He's going to be in the mix. I mean, he's someone. He's not going to get the attention that some of these other guys do, even though he won SEC Player of the Year last year. It's like it seems like people are probably still going to undervalue him. But he has a chance to be right in there again. There's no doubt about it. Reed Travis or PJ Washington. I would probably, it seems like you always have to throw a Kentucky player in the mix. That's just kind of the law. But I would put probably both of those guys in the running right near the top 2, because I think you're talking about a team that could potentially not be the SEC champion, just that, but potentially be the number 1 team in the country. And you kind of look to guys on there that could kind of play those big roles. And I think those are 2 guys that I would really look at and say they're probably really good bets at this point. You can't argue against Waters either. Even someone like Austin Wiley coming back, I'm so just kind of impressed by what I've seen from him thus far, and knowing he's going to get back on the court. I just think he can have a monster year. And let's say Auburn wins the SEC again, he's going to be right there too. So there's no shortage of options. Like you said, the best money is always probably on someone on Kentucky, especially knowing the kind of year we think they're going to have. So I may lean towards, someone like Reed Travis or someone like that, but I can't let my guy Grant Williams get disrespected either, because, man, he's just done such a tremendous job developing as a player. And even though everyone knows that what he did last year, he's still going to be really hard to guard.
Yeah, and you mentioned Reed Travis, and I have as my newcomer of the year. I'm sure you could. There's plenty of freshmen. There's plenty of freshmen you could go with, but I'm going with Reed Travis. I think playing out at Stanford on the West Coast, I don't think a lot of the college basketball fandom gets to see him a lot. This guy's a 20-10 guy. I mean, this is an All-American level player. Yep. And I don't think a lot of people know the level of player that Kentucky is getting. So he's my newcomer of the year. I just love his game. I've watched him a lot. I stay up late and I watch a lot of Pac-12 hoops. So he's my newcomer of the year. Like I said, I think you certainly could go with plenty of freshmen, but I'm going with Travis.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm putting him in the SEC Player of the Year category, he's probably my easy choice for that too. But like you said, I mean, you look at all the freshmen around the league, and it's basically take your pick. Just kind of, just pick them at random, because that's how good they are. Andrew Nembhard, we talked about him earlier. I'm really kind of excited to watch him too, and I think he'll be right there among that group when we talk about newcomers, freshman of the year type of players, and of course the whole entire Kentucky bunch. So,
all right, and finally, your breakout player in the SEC. I like Justin Minaya at South Carolina, but I'm going to stick with Keith Stone. I've been talking him up all off season. I think he's going to get the opportunities needed to have a breakout season. I love the fact that he can step out and shoot the three. I think he was at 42% last year. Very smooth, like you said. So I'm going with Keith Stone at Florida.
I don't know. I think this guy would classify. He could be put in this spot because I felt like he kind of had a breakout year last year, but I think you could still put him in there. He would be near the top of the list for me, probably Jeremiah Tillman, because knowing what Missouri's got, knowing that they're going to have to rely on him, that's just kind of by necessity. He's going to have to be someone that's kind of a high volume guy in a lot of areas on both ends of the floor, probably. So I think, getting the foul situation under control. We had problems fouling last year, but sometimes that happens with freshman big guys. The game starts to slow down a bit more as you get older. So I do think that he's someone I could probably take my pick from that Georgia sophomore class that I keep talking about. Hammond's kind of broke out last year, I guess you could say. Claxton, Hightower, if Georgia can exceed expectations, you could put those guys in there. Chase Johnson from Florida comes back. I think Florida's got several guys on that roster. You could probably put, like you just said, with someone like Keith Stone.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys. Chumo Kiki. I mean, take your pick. The SEC, loaded with talent.
Blake, when you sit down like we just did and go team by team, player by player, you realize how ridiculously good this is going to be. I mean, wow.
Yeah, you got to. But here's the thing we always say, Tony. Everybody can get upset when a team's picked 13th or 14th in the league. You got to finish somewhere. Somebody's got to lose. And so even as talented as all these teams are, somebody's got to lose. And, that's the way it is, the way it works.
All right. So that is going to wrap up the SEC preview. This is the College Hoop News Podcast. Thank you, Blake, for joining. Blake will certainly be back at some point this year for a weekly recap. Definitely check him out again at southeasthoops.com. He has two podcasts, the Southeast Hoops podcast and the Marching to Madness podcast. You have a new episode coming out tomorrow, correct, Blake?
Yeah, we've got Tad Boyle from Colorado coming on. Had a good conversation with him today. Talked a lot about that team. Pac-12, Conference of Champions, going to be a fun year, and really excited to look at someone like McKinley Wright, who had a huge year last year as a freshman. He's got a lot of young players, too. That's kind of the theme, a lot of youth. So,
all right, everybody. Well, thank you for listening tonight. I will be back on Sunday. We're going to be talking Mountain West Hoops with Eli Betker from Mountain West Wire, so looking forward to that. Obviously, have a lot of exciting teams in that conference this year, especially with Nevada, who looks like a top 10 club coming out of the gate here. We will talk to you soon. Tony Patelis, this is the College Hoop News Podcast. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks.